Nobody warns you about the quiet ones. The ones who slip past your defenses not with force but with need, small, wordless, absolute need that reaches for you in the dark and will not let go. I knew what I was in that palace. I had known it since I was old enough to understand what the word nobody meant when it was aimed at you. 3 children changed the shape of that word. They didn't know the rules. They didn't know I wasn't supposed to matter. They reached for me anyway. That was the beginning of everything I almost lost, and everything I never knew I already had. If you have ever been the person nobody thought to choose, and then one day, something did, you know exactly what this costs. Stay with me. Subscribe so you don't lose this. Stories like this one don't find you twice. The grease never fully left my hands. For years in the Alcatraz kitchens, and I had accepted this. There was a smell that lived in the cracks of my knuckles, copper and rendered fat, and something underneath both I had no name for, that no amount of scrubbing reached. The other kitchen workers called it honest work. They said it like a kindness. I had learned to receive it as one. The Alcatraz was many things to many people. To the city of Boise, it was old money and older power, a palace that had stood in the foothills long enough that most people had stopped asking who built it or why the lights in its upper floors never quite went out. To the vampire court, it was home. To me, it was the place I had been allowed to stay, which was not the same thing as belonging, but was close enough that I had stopped measuring the distance. I was 17, and I had been here since I was 13, and I had learned the particular art of not being noticed. Move quietly. Answer when spoken to. Never look at the upper floor staff like you are wondering about their lives. Take up exactly the space your work requires and not one breath more. It was a Tuesday in November when the evening shift brought the upper floor attendants down with their platters. They moved through the kitchen the way they always did, fine livery, barely scraped silver, eyes that swept the room without landing on anything that didn't concern them. A platter came down hard on the edge of my basin. The water came up cold and heavy and hit me square in the chest. I looked up. The attendant was already mid-sentence with the woman beside him. Already gone. Already somewhere I wasn't. I turned back to the basin. Don't, I told myself. The word was old and practiced. Don't give them the shape of you. I had been telling myself this for 4 years. Some nights it felt like armor. Some nights it felt like the thing you whisper when the armor is already off, and you're just hoping no one looks too closely. The kitchen thinned. The pilot lights hissed. I dried my hands on the least dirty towel I could find and walked the back passage to my room. Room was a generous word. It had been cold storage once, before whatever renovation had softened the Alcatraz's bones into something fit for a royal court. The floor remembered its old purpose, always a few degrees below the rest of the palace, pressing its chill up through the thin mat I slept on. I had hung a scarf across the high window. It moved when the Idaho wind found the gap above the sill, and I had grown so used to its movement that stillness in the fabric now felt like a warning. I sat on the edge of the mat. Then I heard it. It had been going for 3 weeks, long enough that the palace had reorganized itself around the sound the way a body reorganizes around pain, not healing it, just rerouting everything else to avoid it. 3 voices. Coming down through stone and floor and gilded ceiling, filtered by distance into something thin and continuous, like a frequency rather than a sound. The royal triplets. I had never seen them. Kitchen workers did not see the upper floors except in passing, and the nursery wing was as far from my world as a different country. But I knew the shape of that crying the way you know certain weather, not because anyone explained it, but because your body registers it before your mind catches up. They were not being comforted. They had not been comforted in 3 weeks. I pulled my knees to my chest and sat with the sound of it, and let myself do the thing I always did when the palace pressed down too hard. I thought of him. Lucien. The memory was 4 years old and worn smooth from handling. I had been 13, newly arrived, still learning which corridors led where. Lost in one of the Alcatraz's lesser passages, wallpaper showing its age, no windows, the kind of hallway that exists to connect things rather than be seen. He had appeared at the far end of it. I remembered the height of him, the stillness, the particular quality of someone who has never once needed to fill silence with sound. He had looked down at me. "You shouldn't be here alone," he said. His voice was not unkind. He walked me back to the kitchen himself. I remembered the way Horace had gone the color of old paper at the sight of us. Remembered the slight gesture Lucien made. Almost nothing, just a nod toward me. A word I didn't fully catch, that had settled something. Confirmed my place here. Given me continued ground to stand on despite the fact that I had no bloodline, no patron, no argument for being kept. I had been building meaning from that nod, ever since. He saw you, I whispered to the dark. Once he looked and he saw you, and you didn't disappear. Above me, through 3 floors of stone and history, the crying moved through a long rise and settled into something lower. Not quieter, just more tired. 3 children who had lost their mother. 3 children that every healer and attendant and wet nurse in the Alcatraz had failed to reach. I had no business thinking what I was thinking. I sat with my back against the cold wall, and I thought it anyway, turned it over in the dark like something I'd found, and wasn't sure I should keep. One day, I told myself, not a plan, not even a hope, exactly. Just the thing you say when there is nothing else to say, and the night is very long, and somewhere above you, 3 small people are still waiting for someone to come. Morning came, and the crying hadn't stopped. I knew this before I opened my eyes. It was in the air of the whole building, that particular tension a house gets when something inside it has been wrong for too long, when the people living in it have stopped flinching at the sound because flinching takes energy they no longer have. I went to the kitchen. I worked. I kept my hands busy and my eyes down, and I did not think about the upper floors. I did not think about them so deliberately and with such focus that by the time Horace sent me to the cold store for the 3rd time for things I had already brought him, I had to accept that I was not, in fact, not thinking about them. The door opened mid-morning. The woman who came through it was not kitchen staff. I knew her by position if not by name, head nursery attendant, upper floors, the kind of authority that doesn't announce itself because it doesn't need to. She was not moving with authority now. Her hair was correctly pinned, but her collar had a stain she hadn't noticed, and there was a look behind her eyes that I recognized. The look of someone who has run out of options and has come somewhere they wouldn't ordinarily come. She spoke to Horace. I kept working. I caught the shape of it without meaning to. 3 weeks, every wet nurse dismissed, the healers finding nothing, the king at the edge of something nobody wanted to name. Anyone, she said. Her voice was flat with exhaustion. I am asking anyone who is willing. The kitchen found reasons to study its own surfaces. I set down the pot I was holding. I said, I can help carry things. Whatever you need brought up. She looked at me the way people look at unexpected offers, measuring, not unkind but not warm either. You work the lower kitchen. Yes. A pause. She was calculating something. What it was, I couldn't tell. Come then. I followed her. I want to be honest about what I was thinking as we walked those stairs. I was thinking about the children, genuinely, that part was true. 3 weeks of that sound filtering down through stone, and I had built an entire interior life around those 3 unknown faces. But underneath that, quieter and less examined, I was thinking about where those stairs led. About the upper floors I had never walked. About the fact that if I was useful here, truly useful, in a way that couldn't be dismissed, then perhaps the palace's understanding of what I was might shift, even slightly, even just enough. I was thinking about Lucien. I knew I was thinking about him. I walked up the stairs anyway. The upper halls were different in the way that money is different from the absence of money, not just more, but a different quality of everything. The floors absorbed sound. The ceilings went up past the point of reason. The air held the faint mineral trace of very old stone and something underneath it I had no framework for, something that registered not as smell exactly but as age, as accumulated time, as the particular atmosphere of a place where power has lived long enough to leave a residue. I heard the nursery before I saw it. Up here, without distance to soften it, the crying had texture. 3 distinct registers, each doing something slightly different. One high and insistent, one lower and rhythmic like a question on repeat, one that moved between them as if trying to translate. All 3 underneath, by a quality I felt in my sternum rather than my ears. The attendant pushed the door open. 3 cribs. 3 small bodies. 3 faces red and wet with the specific exhaustion of children who have been asking for something so long they have nearly forgotten what they were asking for. 2 other attendants stood near the window. They didn't look up. I walked to the nearest crib. I don't have a clean explanation for this. I have tried to construct one many times since, and it never holds. I walked to the nearest crib and I reached in, and I laid my palm flat against the nearest child's chest, over the small, rapid movement of her ribs, and I stood there. The crying stopped. Not winding down. Not fading. It stopped like a held note released, like a room after a door closes. The child's eyes opened. Dark. Startled. They found my face and stayed there. In the second crib, silence. In the third, one last sound, a single syllable, almost indignant, and then that too was gone. The room held what came after. I did not move my hand. I had spent 4 years making myself small enough to keep. I had learned the precise dimensions of invisible and stayed inside them. I had built my entire existence around the practice of not being too much, not wanting too openly, not taking up space that hadn't been assigned to me. These 3 children had no knowledge of any of that. They looked at me, all 3, across the room, some awareness moving between them that had no name, and they simply decided. Not toward the sound I made. Not toward the warmth of a body close by. Toward me, whatever I was. Whatever they recognized in me that I had not yet recognized in myself. One of the attendants behind me exhaled. I kept my eyes on the children. For the first time in 4 years, for the first time, if I was being honest, in longer than that, something had turned in my direction and chosen without being asked. I stayed very still, the way you stay still when something rare has landed near you and you understand that the wrong move will end it. I stayed still, and I let it be real. 2 years is long enough to stop calling something temporary. I had told myself in the beginning that it was practical. The children needed calming. I was the one who could do it. When they no longer needed me, I would go back to the lower kitchen and resume the dimensions of my previous life, and that would be that, and nothing would be lost because nothing had been claimed. That is not what happened. 2 years, and I knew which one woke first. Always fun, the boy. Some internal clock in him that had nothing to do with light, just a readiness, like he'd been waiting all night for the day to begin. 2 years, and I knew that Sable, the quieter daughter, needed to be lifted before she asked, because by the time she asked, she was already past the reach of ordinary comfort. 2 years, and Ro, the one who had looked at me first that first morning, still reached specifically for my left hand, not my right, for reasons she could not have named, and I had long stopped trying to explain. I knew their weight, the particular way each of them went soft when sleep finally arrived, like something releasing all at once. I knew the lullaby worked better hummed than sung in a quiet room, and that one would accept almost any indignity except the smell of the sconce oil they used in the upper corridor, which made him turn his face away with an expression of such complete offense that I had to press my lips together to keep from laughing out loud. The mornings were the best part. Before the rest of the palace assembled itself into its daily hierarchies, before I had to remember what I was and wasn't, there was just the nursery and the 3 of them and the particular quality of early light through those tall windows, pale gold, not warming anything but making everything look briefly worth keeping. I had stopped examining how much I needed those mornings. Some things you leave alone because looking directly at them changes them, and you cannot afford the change. Marta found me on a Wednesday coming out of the nursery with the breakfast tray. She had been the one to bring me up those stairs 2 years ago. She had watched what happened with the children without comment, had arranged the practicalities of my new routine with the efficient silence of someone filing a problem undersolved. We had not spoken much since. We had an understanding that lived in the space between words. She stopped when she saw me. Something in her face said she had been deciding when to do this for a while. "Put that down," she said. I set the tray on the hall table. She looked at me steadily. Marta was not a woman who softened things for the sake of comfort, and she did not soften this. "You understand what this house is," she said. "You understand what you are inside it." I kept my hands still at my sides. "They call for you." Her voice was level, not unkind. Not a sound, not a general wanting you specifically by whatever sense they have for you. The other attendants have noticed. It is only time before it reaches someone who will take it to him. She paused. "And when it does, Elsa, it will not matter what they feel. It will not matter what you feel. What matters in this palace is what he decides. You know this." The corridor was very quiet. The candle in the nearest sconce had burned low, the flame bending slightly with my breath. "I know," I said. She looked at me a moment longer. The look of someone who has delivered the truth and understands it will not be used. "All right," she said. 2 words that meant, "I have done what I can. The rest is yours." She walked away. Her footsteps went around the corner and out of hearing. I stood there with the tray and the cooling breakfast and Marta's words sitting in the air where she'd left them. I turned them over, looked at them from every angle available. Every angle said the same thing. She was right, completely and inarguably right, and I had known it before she spoke, and knowing it had not stopped me from climbing those stairs every morning for 2 years. Knowing it would not stop me tomorrow. I picked up the tray and went back through the nursery door. All 3 faces turned toward me. Ro lifted both arms. Finn made the sound, the low, specific note that was mine alone, that Marta had been telling me the palace had noticed, and the tightness in my chest loosened in a way I could not have produced by will. I sat on the floor between the cribs. I started to sing, the lullaby, the only one I knew completely, learned so long before I could find the memory of learning it that it felt less like a song and more like something I'd been born already carrying. I didn't know where it came from. I had stopped wondering. Sable leaned her forehead against the crib rail, eyes heavy. Finn settled back against his pillow. Ro curled 2 fingers around my thumb and held on with the calm certainty of someone who has never once doubted this is where they belong. He would understand, I told myself. If it came to it, he was a good man. The nod in that corridor 4 years ago, the quiet word that had kept me here when I had no right to be kept, these were not the gestures of a man without decency. If he knew how much they needed me, if someone explained it properly, he would see it. He would understand. The lullaby moved through the room. 3 small faces, peaceful now, the morning light across them like something careful. I believed what I was telling myself. I want you to understand that. I believed it with everything I had, because everything I had was in that room, and the alternative was a door I was not yet willing to open. I have thought about that morning many times since. The specific quality of ordinary things right before they end. The nursery windows held the pale November light that Boise does in late autumn, not warm, just present, the kind that makes everything look briefly like it matters. Finn had gotten his tunic off again. I had given up asking how. He was wearing it around his shoulders like a declaration, marching the length of the rug with his chin up, deeply pleased with himself. Sable had taken one of Ro's shoes and was holding it behind her back with the calm composure of someone who sees no reason to explain themselves. Ro was sitting in the center of the floor eating a piece of bread she had definitely extracted from the breakfast tray without my noticing, watching me with large, unhurried eyes. I was laughing, the real kind, the kind that lives in the chest rather than the face, that you don't perform for anyone. All 3 of them were laughing too, in their separate ways. Finn's full body and soundless, Sable's rare and private, Ro's open and completely unembarrassed, and the room smelled of warm bread and the cedar oil they used on the furniture, and I was not a kitchen servant that morning. I was not an orphan, not a nobody, not a girl surviving on the margins of a house that had no word for what she was. I was just there, completely there, not waiting for anything at all. The doors opened. All 3 children stopped before I registered the sound. That was the first thing. The way they went still. Finn's march arrested mid-step. Ro's bread lowered, Sable's manufactured innocence dissolving into something watchful. They felt it before I did. I turned. Lucien stood in the doorway. I had not seen him close in 4 years. The memory I had been carrying was softer than the real thing, and considerably smaller. He was taller than I'd held him, or perhaps it was the absolute stillness of him, no wasted movement, no adjustment for the room, that made him seem to displace more space than his body required. He wore no formal coat, just dark fabric, his white hair back from his face, and an expression I had not prepared myself for. Not rage. Incomprehension. The particular look of someone confronting a fact that does not fit any existing category, cold and methodical, working through it in real time. His eyes moved from me to the children, back to me, taking inventory. Who are you? Not a question. The shape of one. the weight of something else entirely. My mouth opened. I heard my own voice, steady, which surprised me, giving him my name, my position, 2 years of quiet mornings reduced to their administrative bones. My hands had pressed themselves flat against my thighs. I hadn't told them to. Marta's voice came from the corridor behind him. She had followed. She was explaining, 2 years, the children's response, the consistency of it if he would allow her to, and her voice was measured and careful, and it made no difference at all. Remove her, he said. Not clear the room. Not take her out. Her. The attendants moved. Marta's hand closed on my arm. I went with her. My feet went with her, and the children understood what was happening before the guards reached the cribs. Sable made a sound I had never heard from her. Low. Animal. The sound of something that does not have words for what it knows is wrong. Finn dropped his tunic and ran toward me. A guard caught him at the waist, lifted him back. His legs kept moving in the air, still running toward me from 3 feet off the ground. Ro screamed. Ro, who almost never screamed, who had looked at me first that first morning with those dark, startled eyes. She screamed with her whole body, arms straight out, reaching, leaning so far forward that the guard holding her had to adjust her weight. 3 sets of arms, all reaching the same direction. The doors closed. I was on the floor of the corridor. I don't know when that happened. The stone was cold through my skirt, and Marta was crouching beside me, her hand on my back, saying something. I could hear the shape of her words, but not the content. On the other side of the doors, 3 voices breaking. He came in without context. That was the first thought that assembled itself. He walked in and saw something he didn't understand, and he reacted. Any person reacts. It looked wrong without the 2 years behind it, without knowing what they were before and what they became, and if someone could sit with him, calmly, and lay out the full history of it, he would see. He is not an unreasonable man. He kept me here when he had no reason to keep me. He looked at a 13-year-old girl lost in his corridor, and he chose, without obligation, to let her stay. That is not nothing. That is not what men without decency do. He would hear it differently when the shock passed. When someone explained it properly. When he understood. Marta had stopped talking. She was simply there beside me, her hand unmoving on my back, not asking me anything. The crying on the other side of the doors did not stop. I pressed my palms flat against the cold stone and built the story carefully, the way you build something you need to be load-bearing. I filled every gap. I smoothed every edge that didn't fit. I was very practiced at this. I had been building that particular story since I was 13 years old, since a man looked down at a lost girl in a corridor and said 4 words in a voice that was not unkind. I had never once let myself ask whether 4 words were enough to build a life on. I was not going to ask it now. 3 days. That is how long I lasted. 3 days of the lower kitchen, of grease and cold water, and the specific smallness of a life that had briefly been larger. 3 days of telling myself what Marta had been telling me all along, that it was over, that it had always been going to end this way, that the only reasonable thing now was to accept the dimensions of what remained and stop reaching past them. I was very reasonable about it. During the day, the nights were harder. The crying had started again. Of course it had. I heard it the first night the same way you hear a sound you were braced for, not surprise, just the arrival of a thing already known. It came down through the stone the same, as always. 3 voices. Fun's insistent rhythm. Sable's low distress. Rose was the one I had the most trouble with, the particular frequency of it, the way it moved between asking and giving up and asking again. I lay on my mat, and I did not go to them. I was not going to go to them. The second day, word moved through the palace the way bad news always moves, not announced, just suddenly present in every conversation, in the way people lowered their voices near doorways. Isabel's mortal kingdom was mobilizing. No one used the word war directly. They used words around it, careful words, words that left the shape of the thing without touching it. The Alcatraz went on to lockdown before evening. No movement between wings, without clearance. No unauthorized access to the upper floors. I heard this and thought, good. That settles it. The decision has been made for me. I went to bed the second night and listened to the crying and did not move. The third day I worked through breakfast prep and the morning service and the afternoon washing, and I did not think about the nursery. I thought about it so completely and continuously that by late afternoon I had scrubbed the same pot 4 times, and Horace had looked at me twice without speaking, which from Horace was practically an intervention. The palace corridors were quieter than usual that evening. The lockdown had pulled most of the upper staff to their assigned wings. The servants' passages, the narrow ones, the ones that ran between the walls like the building's own circulatory system, were empty. I knew those passages. For years of learning which corridors led where, I told myself I was going to get air. There was a window at the end of the east passage that looked out over the foothills, and sometimes in the evenings the last light on the Boise Hills was the only thing that made the day feel like it had been worth completing. I told myself that was where I was going. I was at the nursery door before I finished the thought. I stood there for a moment with my hand not quite touching the wood. This is the part one have the least patience for in myself, looking back. Not the going. I understand the going. I have made my peace with the going. It is the pause. The moment where I knew exactly what I was doing and the cost of it, and I stood there in that corridor, and I chose. I opened the door. The room hit me before my eyes adjusted. The sound, all 3 of them, and the smell of the room wrong in the specific way of a space where no one has been attending properly, the air close and stale, the evening meal tray still sitting untouched by the window. They were alone. No attendants. No one. They saw me, and the crying changed register entirely from the sustained, exhausted grief of children who have stopped expecting rescue to something rawer, more immediate, the sound of being found. Ro threw herself against the crib rail. Fun's hands were already reaching. Sable, quiet, composed Sable who never asked for things, was making a sound I felt in the back of my throat. I crossed the room. I lifted them. 1, then 2, then the third pressed against my side, and they held on with the focused desperation of small bodies that have been waiting too long in the dark. The crying stopped. That moment of stillness. All 3 of them against me, breathing evening out, the room going quiet around us. I let myself have it. Fully. I knew what it was costing. I took it anyway. Then the door opened. Not Marta this time. Lucien. 2 guards behind him. His eyes found me with no searching at all, as if he had known exactly where I would be. The cold in his expression was not the incomprehension of 3 days ago. This was something decided. Take her, he said. The children felt the guards before they reached me. All 3 of them tightened at once. Fingers digging in, faces turning into my neck and shoulder, that low sound from Sable rising. The guards' hands closed on my arms and the children's grip broke, and then there was screaming. All 3 of them, the specific register of children who do not understand why the thing they need is being pulled away. I was in the corridor. Then the stairwell. The screaming above me, growing distant. The guard's voice was flat, reciting something. The words arrived in pieces. Trespass. Treason. The pit. Dawn. The stone stairs went down and down. I had spent 6 years making myself small enough to keep. Behind me and above me, growing fainter with every step, 3 voices calling for something that was no longer there to answer. The pit smelled of cold stone and old water, and something underneath both that I had no desire to name. I had been sitting with my back against the far wall long enough that the chill had moved past my skin and settled into the muscle. A single torch burned in the corridor beyond the bars, too far to warm anything, close enough to make the dark visible. I could see the shape of my own hands in my lap. I kept looking at them the way you look at things that have stopped belonging to you. Dawn, the guard had said. I turned the word over. Dawn. A fact, not a threat. Just the name of when. I want to tell you I was thinking about Lucien, about the nod in the corridor, the 4 words, the story I had been building for 6 years on that foundation. I want to tell you it was crumbling, that I was finally seeing it clearly, that the pit had given me the gift of clarity. What I was actually thinking about was Rose's face when the guards pulled me away from her. The exact expression. The way her arms had stayed stretched out for a moment after I was gone, reaching at empty air, not yet understanding that reaching wouldn't bring me back. That was the thing I sat with in the dark. Not my own death. Hers. I don't know when I heard it. The sound arrived before I had a category for it. A soft scuffing, a regular, punctuated by something that might have been breathing. I raised my head. The corridor beyond the bars was empty. Then it wasn't. 3 small shapes materialized in the torchlight, low to the ground, moving with the catastrophic coordination of creatures that had very recently acquired legs and had not yet reached an agreement with them. They were glowing, faintly, just at the edges, the particular cold light of vampire blood surfacing for the first time in children far too young for it, called up by something stronger than readiness. They had never manifested before. Not once in 2 years. They had done it tonight. Finn reached the bars first, and promptly walked into them face first. He sat back, looked at them with an expression of deep personal offense, then looked at me. His glow flickered with the effort of his indignation. Sable arrived beside him with considerably more dignity, until she tripped over her own foot and caught herself on the bars, hanging there for a moment with the composure of someone pretending that was always the plan. Ro came last. She sat down directly in front of my cell, looked at me through the bars with those dark, steady eyes, and made the sound. The low note that was mine. As if to say, "We are here. We came. Now do the part where you fix it." I pressed my hand through the bars and touched her face. She leaned into my palm and closed her eyes. That was the moment. Right there. Not the escape, the moment before it, where 3 children had done something impossible purely because the alternative was a world without me in it, and I understood for the first time that I was not nothing to them the way I had always been nothing to everyone else. I was the thing they came for in the dark. I looked up. Beyond them, mounted to the corridor wall, a ring of keys on an iron hook. Finn had already noticed. He was staring at it with the specific focus of a child who has identified a target and is formulating a plan of questionable quality. He walked toward it 3 steps, too, then sat down abruptly, distracted by something on the floor. A pebble. He picked it up and studied it with great seriousness. "Fun." My voice came out in a whisper. He looked up, bright-eyed, still holding the pebble. I pointed at the keys.
He looked at them, looked back at me,
stood up and walked directly into the wall beside the hook. Sable, observing this with the patience of someone managing her expectations, made her way to the hook from the other direction. She was tall enough, barely, to get her fingers around the ring. She pulled. The keys came off the hook, swung wide, and caught Finn squarely across the ear. He sat down again. The keys hit the stone floor with a sound that rang off every wall in the corridor, and I stopped breathing entirely. No footsteps came. The torch burned on. Ro looked at the keys, looked at me, looked at the distance between them and the cell. She picked up the ring in both hands, staggered under the weight of it, and began walking toward me in the determined zigzag of a child who has never carried anything this heavy and will not be the one to say so. She made it 4 steps before Finn recovered and decided to help. He grabbed the other side of the ring. They immediately began walking in opposite directions. The keys slid across the stone, sideways, then back, then sideways again, in a slow, chaotic arc that was moving, in its own improbable way, toward my cell. I reached through the bars as far as my arms would go. Sable watched her siblings for a moment with the expression she reserved for things beneath her direct involvement. Then she walked forward, placed one small hand on Finn's back, and pushed. He lurched forward. The keys flew. My hands closed around cold iron. I was shaking so hard it took me 4 tries to find the right key. The lock turned. The door swung open and all 3 of them piled into my arms at once. Small, solid, glowing faintly at the edges, smelling of cedar oil and something new underneath it, something that was theirs and no one else's. I held them, and I did not make a sound, because there were no sounds sufficient. Then I stood up. I settled Ro on my hip, took Finn's hand, and Sable pressed herself against my other side. We ran. Up through the pit's dark stairwell, through the servants' passage, up, and through the kitchen door at the top, where a man was standing in the low light with a canvas pack over one shoulder and a folded map in his hand. I had seen him before. The palace gardener. Quiet, human, the kind of person a place like the Alcatraz employs and then forgets about. He looked at me, at the 3 children clinging to me, at the cell key still in my fist, and his expression said he had been expecting this for longer than I had. There's a route through the foothills, he said. East of the city. I know it well. He held out the map. My name is Ezekiel. I took the map. There are women in this city, and in every city, who have poured themselves into lives that did not pour back. Who learned to call that love, and almost believed it. If this story found you tonight, it was not an accident. There are others here. Stay close. Subscribe if you want to find them. I looked back once, at the Alcatraz's lit windows, at the life I had built inside it from the scraps I was given, and then I turned toward the dark foothills, and I ran toward what was waiting. Ezekiel did not talk much.
I was grateful for that.
He walked ahead just enough to break the undergrowth for us, checking back every few minutes without making a production of it. A glance, a slight adjustment of pace, the quiet competence of someone who has been doing useful things in the background of other people's lives for long enough that it no longer required thought. The foothills east of Boise were dark and cold and smelled of sage and frozen ground, and the Alcatraz sat behind us in the valley like something that had always known we would leave. I did not look back at it again. Finn slept against my shoulder within the first hour. Sable walked on her own for a while, then reached up for my hand without asking, and I gave it without looking down. Ro rode on Ezekiel's back with her chin resting on top of his head, watching the dark with those steady eyes as if cataloging it for later. We walked until the city lights were small enough to be stars, until the cold had moved from uncomfortable to simply the condition of the world, until my legs had stopped asking questions and accepted their assignment. I did not let myself think about where we were going. I was afraid that if I thought about it directly, it would stop being real. The mortal settlement came into view near dawn. Not a kingdom in the way the Alcatraz was a kingdom, nothing gilded, nothing built to announce itself. Low structures, warm light in windows, wood smoke rising into the gray pre-morning. The kind of place that had been there long enough to stop trying to impress anyone. A woman was waiting at the edge of it. She was standing very still in the way people stand when they have been standing there for a while, and do not want to appear to have been waiting, and the moment I came close enough to see her face properly, she stopped pretending. I stopped walking. I don't have a clean explanation for what happened in that moment. Nothing she did was dramatic. She didn't move toward me.
She didn't speak.
She simply looked at me, looked at my face with an attention so specific and so old that the air between us seemed to change pressure, and her hands came up slowly to cover her mouth. Her eyes were the same shape as mine. I had never once in my life seen anyone whose eyes were the same shape as mine. Ezekiel's hand came to my shoulder briefly.
Steady.
Then he stepped back and took the children, and I walked the remaining distance alone. She lowered her hands when I reached her. She was trembling, not with cold, the trembling of someone exerting enormous effort to remain upright through something that keeps trying to take their legs out. Elsa, she said. Just my name. The way she said it, like a word she had been keeping in a room by itself for years, bringing out only when no one could see. You know me? I said. I have always known you. Her voice broke on the last word. She steadied it. I need to tell you something. I need you to hear all of it before you decide what to do with it. She told me. All of it. Her name, Isabel, queen of this quiet place, daughter of a human line that had intersected exactly once with the vampire court of Boise and produced something neither world had a category for. The affair with Lucien, young and real, and ended by the pressures of two families pulling in opposite directions. The pregnancy she had carried alone. The midwife who had made the decision to hide me, not discard, hide, the specific difference, the only difference that mattered, to protect something that both worlds would have destroyed on principle. I had not been abandoned. I had been kept alive by someone making the only choice available to them and bearing the cost of it in silence. I stood there and let the information move through me. It was like pressing on a bruise you have had so long you stopped cataloging it as pain. The surprise not that it hurts, but that it had always been there, that the ache I had been organizing my whole life around had a source, a reason, a shape that was not nothing but this. My hands were shaking. I pressed them together and held them. Isabel watched me. She did not fill the silence. There's more, she said finally. Lucien stepped out from the doorway behind her. He looked different here. Diminished, not in size but in certainty. The absolute stillness that I had always read as power looked, in this context, like a man who had run out of positions to hold. He had come without guards, without the coat. His hands were at his sides, and he was looking at me the way people look when they have rehearsed something and arrived at the moment and understood that no version of the rehearsal was adequate. He said my name. Then he said, "I did not know." The silence after that was long enough to breathe in twice. "I know," he said, and his voice had something in it I had never heard from him. Rough, unmanaged, the sound of a man making no attempt to control how he sounds. I am not asking you to accept that as sufficient. I am telling you because you deserve the truth of it, and the truth is that I looked at you and I saw a threat to my children, and I was wrong, and what I did." He stopped. "There is no proportion I can offer you." He crossed the distance between us, and he did something I had not prepared for. He put his arms around me, not with certainty, with the careful tentativeness of someone who understands they may not have the right and is asking with their body rather than their words, offering something that could be refused. I stood inside it for a moment that had no length I could measure. Then I leaned into it. Not because the story I had built around him was true, it wasn't, most of it had never been true, but because this here, now, was something different from that story. This was a man standing in the cold admitting the full cost of what he'd done without asking me to make it easier for him. That was worth something. The triplets arrived between us from the direction of Ezekiel, inserting themselves with complete disregard for the gravity of the moment. Van grabbing a fistful of my sleeve, Sable pressing her forehead against my hip, Ro climbing Lucien's leg with the efficiency of someone who has decided this is simply where she lives now. I felt Isabel's hand on my back. Ezekiel stood nearby, quiet, belonging to this gathering by the simple fact of what he had carried us through. Above the foothills, the Boise sky was doing what it does in the last minutes before full dawn. Not light yet, but the dark going softer, the stars still visible, the mountains becoming their own shapes again against a sky that hadn't decided yet what color to be. The war was still out there. Tomorrow it would require something from all of us. Tonight the stars were out, and I was standing in a circle of people who were, without qualification or condition, mine. I had spent 6 years learning to want nothing. I looked up at the sky, and I let myself want this.